With the trade deadline just a few days away and playoff races heating up by the moment, we bring you another edition of Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. I'm Dave Turner along with Pat Pickens. And Pat, before we start today, I have two interesting stats that probably only interest me. Maybe they'll interest you, but probably no one else outside of that. Anyway, the Vancouver Canucks, a few days ago, they had just finished out losing 4 games by the score of 5-2. I haven't been able to find it anywhere. I'm going to assume that's the first time that's ever happened. Even more ridiculous, last night's Colorado versus San Jose game, with Sean Matthias getting traded to Colorado and Nick Spaulding getting traded to San Jose, their first game in action for their respective teams was against each other last night. Who scored the first 2 goals of that game? You guessed it, Nick Spaulding and Sean Matthias. So now my question is, has that ever happened? Pat, we've been around this game a long time and seeing a lot of interesting stats. It's funny that you still get to see things that blow your mind in terms of, wow, that's actually something that has never happened probably, or at least very often in the long history of this game.
I was going to say, how often do you see a guy get in his first game and score and register a point, get on the score sheet in general, let alone score a goal and then have his former teammate score a goal? I really like that Nick Spaulding trade for San Jose, only because, Polak's going to give him some depth in the back end, but I like Spaulding a lot. He's a versatile player. He seems like the kind of player, although he hasn't, proven that this is true, that you could win with the versatility. And he showed the goal scoring. Obviously got a little help there from the defender. Puck hit, it seemed to rise up. But I like that deal a lot for San Jose. But I also saw this, Dave, that, with these trades, San Jose became the oldest team in the NHL, which coached by Pete DeBoer. Is that even a question, really?
I think maybe when Pete's finally done with the NHL, he'll open up like a retirement home or something like that. It just seems to be the way it's going for him these days.
He can coach in a senior league or something. But yeah, no, I laughed at that when I saw that, because it seems like, that's his MO. He can't stand the young players. And yeah, look at Jonas Donskoy. He's a bright young star, budding star, and Tomas Hertls found his game.
Hertls had a pretty good year, especially of late. He's been very good.
Yeah, so I like, that's a dangerous little team out there that no one's really talking about. But speaking of which, Dave, you said, speaking of teams no one's talking about right now, we move, the playoffs in the West are almost set at this point. There's probably about one spot up for grabs. And you have a team you think that no one's really talking about right now.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with the Minnesota Wild on this one. I think that if you watch their play since they made the trade, and look, I was really down on this team a couple weeks ago, and deservedly so, because they were terrible. All of a sudden, Jason Pominville I think he had 6 points in 5 games or something like that.
Yeah, Vanek too.
Yeah, Vanek's been hot. Dumba continues to grow and is a factor. The goaltending has been better. They won a couple games 5-2, including one over Vancouver in that streak. They lost the other day. That's okay. If you look at it right now, they're 4 points behind Colorado. They have 3 games in hand. So realistically, unless they go on another slide here, they're right at their heels. I like Colorado. But I think if Minnesota is going to play to their potential now, they're a better team. Sure, yeah. Is Minnesota up there with the elite in the West? No. But I think that if this team can play to their own ceiling, I think they have to be in over Nashville and Colorado, to be honest.
Dave, what's interesting to me, and I kind of want to branch off on this. I agree. I heard Jonathan Toews, I was in a scrum with him last week and heard him talk about what Torchetti brings. And the thing is, though, that, it's just, for whatever reason, this team just needs a kick every year. Last year it was the Dubnyk trade. This year, obviously, the firing. It's almost like they're almost like the Kings in that they hit that point during the season. The Kings haven't hit it this year yet, but, where they hit that lull and they lose a bunch of games and the coach starts getting in jeopardy, and then all of a sudden they turn it around. And they, to the last 2 years they did it. This year they seem poised to, with the coach firing. Now, Dave, I don't know if you saw this, but Mike Yeo was interviewed by a bunch of people yesterday or Wednesday about his time in Minnesota. And Mike Russo, who's the great reporter up there, and Chad Graff, who also covers the Wild, were tweeting out questions and answers from Yo. And it's interesting because he still has confidence in himself as a coach. And it's interesting that, to read some of these quotes from him when, I don't know if you saw it. Did you see it, Dave?
No, I actually did not get a chance.
What Yo said. Okay, so here's from hang on a sec. Let me just pull this up. I want to pull these up directly because I'm reading it off a Yahoo thing, and I want to just
no problem. Yeah, the one point I want to make quickly on that before you get into that, though, is the Mike Yeo situation is interesting because I think Chuck Fletcher did everything in his power to not fire him.
Yeah,
I think that he woke up and he said, "Look, I have to fire him." They were good. They're friends apparently, like outside of hockey, kind of friends.
Yeah.
They've kind of go back a little bit, and I think it was a situation where he realized he had no choice but to fire him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. But it's interesting though because Yo's comments were, "I'm a winner," according to Russo. "I'm a winner everywhere I've gone at every level as a player, assistant coach, head coach. I won." Obviously, he was an assistant coach in Pittsburgh with Dan Bilesma on the Penguins team that won the Stanley Cup. And Bilesma kind of apparently gave him a pretty good reference in terms of when it became time to become a head coach. He says he's a player, coach, assistant coach. It's the only place I haven't gone to the finals or won a championship, and I think I ran out of time, which obviously, is the case. His players kind of, it appears, quit on it. So I wonder what you thought is on that, Dave, just because, like you said, Chuck Fletcher wanted to wait. Obviously it's one of those things like what Tom McClellan went through, I think, in San Jose last year, where, everyone in the organization realized they have a great coach or a very good coach on their hands. Everyone realized that firing him would be the mistake, but the players just stopped responding at some point, and a move was inevitable. We talked about Minnesota last week where the Wild needs something. This is a year rife with expectations, and for them to just sit back and fall out of the contention, they needed something. And it's interesting, too, that Yo said straight up that part of the distraction was, they made a pretty good push for Ryan Johansson and fell short because, Nashville offered Seth Jones. So, kind of the disappointment of that, and then, that distraction through that stretch, and then, it's a little strange to me that to see him that honest, one. And then also to get kind of that window into it, I think is fascinating to me because you don't hear coaches ever talk like that. And then when coaches get fired, they generally just go wherever they go. They go home. They don't give interviews. They don't give press availability. And to hear this come out, what is this? 2 weeks after the guy got fired. Almost. It's fascinating.
Yeah, we never get that chance. I remember last year, being with the Devils when they fired.
Same
thinking,
thing.
"Oh, okay, are we gonna ever get a post-mortem from him?" And it didn't really happen.
I was in on that too, Dave, and it was not even offered. It was
that's also the fact that Lou was there. But here's the thing about the whole Yo situation. I feel like this team, because of the money they spent, and considering who's ahead of them in the West, I almost feel like it's like I don't want to give specific countries an example here, but it's almost like a country trying to become a world player in world politics, and knowing that no matter what they do, they're never going to get there. And I almost feel like for them, Minnesota, you lose a few games, you start falling out, and it's not just in terms of playoff spot. but it's also the fact that now that you're not really a contender with these big boys when the goal is certainly for them to have been a contender. When they signed Suter and Parise, the goal was not to be a fringe playoff team.
Yeah, trade for Pominville, sign Vanek, all those deals, yeah.
So I think that there's like a bigger picture here to this team where they look at themselves in the mirror and they say, oh, wow, we're nowhere where we need to be. And here's the thing is, even the best coaches in the world, eventually it runs out. Because if you think about it, if you have a new coach and you're not playing well, and the coach says, look, I need you to do this, this, and this, you're going to do it because you want to impress the new coach, you want to buy in, but eventually it gets to the point where if you're losing enough games and the coach says, look, we got to do this, your response is F you, buddy. Yeah. You know, where it's like, no, it's not working. You know, why are you telling me what to do when clearly nothing, you know, we've tried your thing, it didn't work. You know, so I think everyone eventually gets tuned out that if you're going to start losing, even if you're a good coach, which I think Mike Yeo is, and I think he'll find his way. I could see him getting a job. Maybe not next year. It could happen, but I think in a year and 2 years, maybe.
I mean, you look at how it worked out for – I mean, we could mention McClellan, but also, you know, Bilesma. Bilesma sat out a year and did the broadcasting thing.
But look at Pete DeBoer. Pete DeBoer is going to be in the playoffs.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what? The irony of this is, Dave, is this is at potentially Minnesota's best chance. When you look at the field around them, you know, Anaheim is coming here a little bit, but, you know, Chicago has its warts. Dallas doesn't seem like the perfect you know, Dallas has flaws for sure. You know, who knows LA, who knows Anaheim. You know, once you get past, you know, Chicago and potentially LA, there's a lot of, you know, war and a lot of, you know, and if Minnesota opens with Dallas, if Minnesota somehow gets in and, you know, could hop, I mean, it seems more likely that they're going to get that 8 spot because they have all the games in hand on Colorado, that if they get to play Dallas in the first round, I mean, that could be I mean, now there's still obviously Chicago looming there in the second round, but, you know, I think anybody who gets to play, you know, gets that momentum of the first round. And, you know, we could get to that in a minute where you like St. Louis, where, you know, Dallas is the team you probably want to see in the first round, particularly with Chicago, you know, poised to gear up here for the postseason run.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating with them because who knows? I mean, look, I think they're going to make it, but who knows? I mean, we're going to get to it in a second about Colorado here, but yeah. It's going to be very, very fascinating with that team because I think that regardless, now that they have a new coach in Torchetti right now, I still think that now the expectations are high again, where I don't care if they go in as an 8 seed. They're a team that expects to win playoff series.
Let's not forget, this guy Torchetti has some pedigree. I mean, he won.
Oh, yeah. This is his 3rd time as an interim coach as well. So
yeah. So yeah,
he's been around, and he certainly knows. Though his record wasn't great as an interim coach, but
teams have something to do with that usually.
Yes, of course. But you know, he's been around enough that I think, and especially with Chicago and all that, I think he is a good fit for this team right now. Look, the expectations are going to be there. I'd love to see a Minnesota versus Chicago series, just because. Why not? You know, maybe they can. I mean, how unbelievable would that be if Minnesota gives them a series?
I was gonna say Minnesota fans are not looking forward to that series.
No.
Based on Saturday's result, maybe that's a little different. But we'll move on from the outdoor game, and you know, by the way, that was a beautiful setting. That whole thing.
It was.
We move on from that to the potential of an outdoor game with 70-degree temperatures in the Rocky Mountains. It's wacky, but Dave, you know, when we first heard it come out that they announced the game, I mean, the curmudgeon in me was not wild about this upcoming Stadium Series game in Denver, just because, you know, they're not rivals anymore. They're not even in the same conference anymore, the Red Wings and Avalanche. But the more I hear, you know, in the build up to this game, it's obviously only for 2 points, but, you know, just the nostalgia it brings back from the Avalanche and Red Wings. And Dave, you know, it leads me to remind you, or to bring this point up. First off, you know, the Avalanche went to the Western Conference Finals 7 years in a row from when they started in Colorado through 2002, which to me is a stunning feat. And think about it, that they've faced the Red Wings, that they faced either the Red Wings or the Stars, I believe it was, every year in there. So, you talk, and then start with that fact. And then, go back and remember all the, it all started that first year with Claude Lemieux and the Red Wings. The Colorado's run to the Cup. The Red Wings were, like the Capitals this year, they had the 130-point season. And then Claude, the Avalanche stunned them, and Claude Lemieux, hammering Chris Draper started a rivalry that was, the next decade basically. So, yeah, Dave, we were talking about this a little bit off air, that rivalries really aren't like that anymore, and it's a little sad. But like, just the build-up for this game. I mean, the game won't live up to the hype of the alumni game, even, I don't think, based on the names that are going back to the alumni game. But Dave, just to think about what that Red Wings Avalanche rivalry was, the skill level, the blood level that those teams played. I mean, just to think about that makes this game worth it.
It is. It really brings you back to, when these two teams were as good as it gets. I mean, sure, Dallas was in there too, but I think the hard part is that maybe, there's a lot of younger fans that watch this game, which is great, and we need that. But I think for some people, they might not know of this rivalry that you're saying. I mean, how many people, and I'm sure there will be some, are going to turn on the TV and think, why is Colorado playing Detroit, who's in the Eastern Conference? Just because, they haven't been educated in the game. And I think that it's important for this and for the NHL to certainly, whether it's packages on these series or whatever, I think it's good to, it's recent history. It's not like this is 1905 we're talking about.
Or even like way back, 50s, 60s. This
I mean, this is like, less
20 years.
20 years ago, less than 20 years ago. I think it's important to keep the history of the game alive and to put things in perspective and to show that this was a rivalry that really, I mean, when it was at its peak and one of these teams was basically going to the finals every year, it was as good as it gets. I mean, the amount of the star power on those teams, the amount of Hall of Famers, the amount of people who are just, I mean, legends in the game, not just great, but I mean, really, really up there. Yeah. To me, this was an important rivalry because it raised, we saw great hockey when these teams played. And to me, I think that it's important to keep that alive and to show what it was like. Hopefully we'll get one of those, a playoff rivalry. I mean, maybe the Kings and the Blackhawks, as you mentioned, are there. I think there's not enough pizzazz to those teams. They're too workmanlike. We need a little bit of, something.
I just thought from a pure drama perspective, those series have been so fun. I mean, they've gone 7 games. The 14 one went 7 games, and the 13 one was decided in overtime. I just think from a pure drama perspective, those two teams play these highly dramatic, highly competitive. I mean, that's basically as close as you can get, though, because the skill level is there, and that's the main facet of where Detroit and Colorado was the rivalry. I mean, it was Yzerman, Fedorov, Shanahan, Lidstrom, and then at times it was whether it was Mike Vernon in goal or Chris Osgood or Dominik Hasek towards the end. And then for Colorado it was Sakic and Forsberg, and then Raymond Bourque at points. I mean, every one of these players you name are Hall of Famers, are like first ballot Hall of Famers. And Patrick Waugh in goal for Colorado. I mean, and then you look at the depth players for all those teams. The Drapers and the Lemieux and Holmstrom and some of these guys that just that had big moments in these playoff series, and just how memorable it is. I mean, I was going back today just to watch Patrick Waugh get lit up 7-0 in a Game 7 in 2002, which, I mean, it's unfathomable, and you don't, they played so often, and they played I mean, like, it all started with that Lemieux on Draper hit, but they played so often in playoffs. I mean, it's almost like, think about how Minnesota and Chicago have played a lot lately, but I mean, even these division games, these division rivals don't have the same blood. I mean, we talked about it off air that when Matt Cook lit up Tyson Barrie a couple years ago, It was the same intent as Lemieux's hit on Draper, but it didn't make that rivalry take off. I mean, obviously Cook not being in Minnesota still kind of deters that. The reason that the fight night at the Joe happened was because it was Colorado's first game against the Avalanche in Detroit after Lemieux lit up Draper. So, I mean, they wanted blood. They wanted revenge. So they got it. Free agency kind of saps that for a few reasons. Everybody, a lot of guys have the same agents. They're friends in the offseason. They move around so much that, there's not the same accountability when two teams come in or play each other as opposed to when, individual players play in opposite markets.
Yeah. Here's my question. There's no right answer to this, but what do you feel? I guess if we look at it today and we're hoping that we can eventually build another rivalry like this one that happened because of the quality of the game, I look at how to build a rivalry and say it has to, at this point, not a geographic rivalry, but a rivalry between two teams, who are in the
it happened organically.
Yeah. I look at it and say, A, you need playoff series. B, you need one of those teams to win the cup, which makes it even deeper seeded for the team that has lost.
Yeah.
And C, I think you need to have
it's got to be competitive too.
Yeah, of course. I think it has to spill over into the regular season where something happened that makes you want to see it when it's just one of 82.
I mean the Rangers and Flyers have all that except the championship elements. This whole Simmons and McDonough thing recently, Simmons is kind of the heel of that. But of course, it has to happen organically. It has to happen with high skill. It has to be, one team leaves the other and it's us. And as I said it off air, it's ironic because the league has never marketed rivalries more than they have now. Think about it this way, Dave. St. Louis and Chicago should be like that, right? With the hit with Backus on Seabrook, right?
Yeah, I mean the wakey thing was
and they play each other every year. And St. Louis hates Chicago, and Chicago has left St. Louis in its dust. But those games don't have the same, ornery level or the same agitation level for whatever reason. It's just because skill, I think, is obviously more important these days than fighting is. But there have been moments. I mean, that just didn't spill over into the regular season, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean,
which doesn't make sense because they're always vying for positioning, and St. Louis has actually beat out Chicago in terms of seeding in the regular season the last few years. I don't get why. But here's my question though. Before we wrap this up, to you, do you think that the league has gone to marketing players too much, that they're not able to, other than the Wednesday rivalry thing, that the way that it's looked at is that it's a players league now. It's not as much about the teams. And maybe that's why we're not going to see some new budding rivalries as a result of that.
The NHL is never going to be accused of marketing players too much. They might excuse me. They might market the same players too much.
Yeah, okay, that's my point.
But no, I mean, think about how quick they are to push the original six down, to everyone. Or
but put it this way: when Pittsburgh plays Washington, how many times do they mention Crosby and Ovechkin as opposed to the teams and what it means? I guess that's my point. Is that it's not about. It's still about specific players and that kind of thing, or it's Henrik Lundqvist going up against whoever it is.
Sure. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think in some facets, yes. I think in other facets, like if you look at the stadium games and the outdoor games, they've kept rivalries intact in a lot of cases. I mean, you got Rangers Flyers, you got Rangers Devils, you got Rangers Islanders, you got Blackhawks Wild. You got Ducks and Kings. I mean, people want to. The geography obviously is important, and that's what brings the fans. The fans, care about having their rival, close to them because, you see a lot of them. And think about how Ducks fans feel about the Kings right now. The Kings have the bragging rights right now. St. Louis and Chicago are close. Minnesota and Chicago are close. Fans travel. So, these rivalries are built by geography and by playoffs and by hatred. And give the NHL credit because the new playoff format, it's not that new anymore, but that really lends itself to these these budding rivalries because you're going to get the playoffs series between Chicago and St. Louis. You're going to get them between Minnesota and Chicago. You're going to get them between LA and Anaheim and LA and San Jose and out west.
What about Tampa, Florida in the second round?
Yeah, of course. So I
would love that. The league won't.
They understand that the playoff contempt in playoffs. The level is raised and the contempt leads to rivalries. So, give them credit for that. They know that that's what happens. But at the same time, maybe this is just Detroit and Colorado was unique because it was organic and it did not have anything to do with geography and it did not have anything to do with tradition. It just kind of cropped up out of nowhere because of the skill, because of that one playoff round. And maybe that's just what made it so special and what made that time so unique in the NHL because, even Dallas doesn't have the same rivalry that Detroit and Colorado had. And you got to say that, it was a special time. And maybe, like I said, that's just something that was a one-off and was unique and was special. And that's why we look at it so favorably because it was so different. But either way, the alumni game is going to be a lot of fun, I think.
Absolutely, just to see some of those names out there. But, it's funny, though, that we look at the LA and Chicago thing. And who knows how long they're going to have at the top. But it's funny that Dallas now might be reinserting themselves as the third team again. Which was the case, in the 90s and early 2000s as well. Because, as much as Dallas, maybe they're not being, picked right now, but they certainly, look, they might end up with the most points in the West. So I think,
was there.
Yeah, you got to give them credit. But on to something that, before we get into some deadline stuff here, on to something that I thought was just kind of, it's a circus over there. Ilya Kovalchuk, who is the captain of SK St. Petersburg out there in the KHL, the wonderful KHL. I'm
watching the KHL right now, Dave.
Yeah, look.
I just saw Radulov score a goal.
Yeah, I wonder if he'll come back for the third time. Anyway, Ilya Kovalchuk.
If he quits on his team first. But
speaking of quitting on his team, we already know Ilya Kovalchuk has done that on the NHL level, and apparently he's continuing that trend on the KHL level. He has been suspended for games 3 and 4 of their playoff series against Lokomotiv. Also, credit to Lokomotiv for getting back so quickly into contention after what happened to them. We'll leave that for another day. Yeah. Kovalchuk also stripped of his captaincy. So, of course, all the rumor mongers and everything, he's coming back. I don't want to get into that today. But what does that say about this guy, though? That he, for better or worse, sure, the Illuminati people will like to say that Lou orchestrated the deal to get Kovalchuk to leave. I don't want to get into any of that stuff. That's ridiculous. But the fact is, Kovalchuk leaves the Devils, retires from the NHL to go to the KHL. Now, he's the captain of the team, probably one of the top players in that league.
Probably top player in that league.
And basically he's stripped of his thing and told to go away for a little bit. Either, we don't know the exact reasons, but it seems like maybe he's being lazy or not being a team guy. Should we really be surprised? It just seems like he's always been a me guy.
The irony is that he did, it's maybe not for himself that he left, but he went back there because his family. And I think my reaction is that it's that people don't understand the scrutiny he's under out there, and the pressure he puts on himself. I read an article, I forget for who it was, but that nobody puts. He's got so much pressure on him in the K. People are paying prices to see him. He's making the most money that any KHL player has ever made. and people expect him to produce every night. I guess he's had a down year over in the K this year. And I don't think – I mean, Sergei Zubov is an NHL player who's his coach now, so he knows a thing or two about expectations and going there. I don't necessarily – I mean, the quote I saw was that that Kovalchuk was too focused on his own personal regimen as opposed to the team's regimen, which would lead you to believe that, he's doing it for himself. But, I don't know whether there's a lot of scrutiny on him, and he hasn't performed. And to me, it only seems like a matter of time before he ends up back here. It may be after it may be years, because, I also read that, he's got to sit out at least a year in all likelihood to get back in the NHL. So, all these rumors popping up about him returning this year, for a playoff run are preposterous, because he has to, I believe he has to clear waivers and get approval from all 30 teams. And do you really think that any team is going to say, yeah, sure, we'll let him back in just to let their rival team, a crack at him? There's no way. At the same time, there is a lot of scrutiny under Kovalchuk over there. And you kind of, from a personal perspective, you kind of feel for him, because I don't think he knew what he was getting himself into when he went over there. I understand that there's some backlash from, Devils fans, and that's all well and good. But, to be separated from your family for that long, and then, the year of the lockout, he went over there and played while the lockout was happening, and he, found out he liked being in his hometown. He liked being with his family. He liked all the things that came with it. He got homesick basically when he came back to New Jersey. And I've spoken with him. I remember speaking with him back then, and I spoken with Tom Galiti, the great beat writer for The Record in New Jersey. He said that through the conversations, through that whole thing, it was just Kovalchuk missed being home. He understood that he had a contract here, and that he basically just was so homesick, needed to find a way to get home. And now he's there, and it's been a disaster. The Russia thing with the Olympics was awful. He's got all this pressure and scrutiny on him to perform every night. I mean, Kovalchuk is a player that gives himself every night, whether he's healthy, whether he's not. He plays big minutes. He plays all circumstances. He scores goals. He puts up points. He makes plays. He's just I always compare him. He's a horse. He just does whatever it takes in every facet, to get his team to make plays, to do all these things. And yet it doesn't even seem to be enough there, Dave, you watched him a ton on that mostly on that run to the Stanley Cup Finals for the Devils in 2012. And, think about all the things he did for that team, even though he was hampered by injury. I mean, for that you can appreciate that, but imagine him doing that and getting his team as the captain to say hypothetically he got the Devils to the Eastern Conference Finals this year, and that all not being enough, and then your coach, and then John Hines suspends him and removes his captaincy. I'm just making this hypothetical, so you got to get the vibe. It seems preposterous. Like it's enough. When is enough here?
Yeah, I mean, sure, maybe there is an issue that they're putting too much pressure on him, but my biggest thing though is I think it all starts with the idea that you have he had to honor his contract there, and he has to honor his contract here. That what's coming with it. Look at Travis Hamonic. I know he has a family issue or whatever it is, and he wants to go home. Mm-hmm. Look, I mean, how many people working 9 to 5 across this country, or working, from anywhere from at a desk to manual labor, have stuff going on, and they'd like to be closer to home or whatever. Unfortunately, in work, when you're working for a living, everything isn't great, and I think that sometimes you have to grin and bear it. How many people who would listen to our show maybe had a bad day at work today, or don't like what they're doing, with their job? It's just part of it. Unfortunately, you have to make money and you have to do things, and I don't like to look at it as, oh, poor this guy who's making millions of dollars and he's homesick or the pressure's there. I kind of look at it and say, like, look, if you get in bed with your contract, you have to live up to it. And you know what? The same thing's going to happen to Steven Stamkos, especially if he goes to Toronto. All the pressure in the world is going to be on him, and he's going to have to live up to that contract. And you know what? He's not going to go to the KHL. He can't bail on it. But, I just look at it and say that if you're a professional athlete and you make your bed with something, unfortunately, you got to take the good with the bad. And in this case, Kovalchuk probably should have seen it coming. Yeah, it does kind of suck that they're expecting him to be Superman every night, because as good as he is, he's not Superman. But you know what, though? With Russia's economy really in trouble as well, I think he should have maybe been a little bit smarter as to know what he was getting himself into.
I don't think it seems like doesn't seem like there's any doubt he's going to end up back here either playing or his career is going to end, soon. It just feels like he's going to end up back here playing at some point, just because, who knows what the KHL even is going to be.
Yeah.
Although we've been talking about the KHL's demise for years here, and it hasn't fallen off yet. But, I mean, they're not, it just feels like that at some point it's going to come crashing down. You mentioned the economy.
Yeah, I just pulled something up before, actually, that I was going to read when we were done here. That it's actually I can't see where it's from, but the idea, it says, with plunging oil prices and double-digit inflation, the Russian economy is cascading downward, causing some of the largest protests the Kremlin has faced in several years. I mean, that's going to affect the hockey end of things too. They can't be shelling out millions of dollars to hockey players if they can't even,
Well, they can't. What about what happened to Donetsk in Ukraine, where their arena got bombed and they had to suspend operation? I mean, this is 3 years of that in Ukraine. I mean, the players aren't going to go play there, if the arena could get burned to the ground. But that's a story for a different day, I suppose. But the biggest story, Dave, in the budding rest of back here in North America is the trade deadline Monday, 3 p.m.
Yeah, or the conclusion of the Maple Leafs jettisoning their entire team.
You know what? You know what, Dave? We talked about tanking last year, and if you have the opportunity to go get Austin Matthews, go do it, man. If you're Toronto right now.
I'm totally okay with it. Look, it's a business. I'm never going to tell someone how to spend their money or how to run their business. If you want to tank, because look, we've seen with the Philadelphia 76ers of the NBA. I know it's a different sport, but it doesn't always work. Look at the Edmonton Oilers. It still hasn't worked.
Buffalo.
I'm never going to hate on a team for trying to do what they think is right. But it's amazing. I mean, look, I think JVR is going to stay. We've seen Phaneuf go already, Spalling, Matthias. Is it going to continue? You think there's more bodies to be moved?
I think P.A. Parento. I think Brad Boyes, who is a reasonable term. Who, Dave, let's face it, Brad Boyes has playoff experience. I mean, he can play top line. He can play second line. He's a goal scorer. I those are the two guys I would look at for sure. I think they some of these older guys that are, they're looking to get younger. They're looking to get, see what they have here a little bit. And, from a rental perspective, those are the two guys I would point to. I mean, if they can move Joffrey Lupul, God bless them. Good luck. If they could move Daniel Winnick, potentially, although he is another year next year, it just seems like Boyes and Parento are the two guys. Interestingly enough, Dave, Parento could be great for a team that is trying to get in, because he's like the shootout expert.
That's true.
So, I mean,
that's a good point.
If there's a team that's looking to improve its shootout performance in New Jersey, he could be a good fit for. Now, listen, Parento, he gets himself in trouble in the coach's doghouse is like every day, it seems like. But I mean, he's immensely skilled, and like I said, the shootout is a big thing with him. But it just feels like him and Boyes are the two guys that are and they're low grade moves. They're not a big deal. Doesn't seem like there's not a lot of money at hand for either of those two guys. Neither of them have no trade, no move clauses. So Michael Grabner is a good penalty killer, is a good depth guy, is not. I mean, it seems like, they traded for him, but if they're willing to get rid, part with everybody except for, probably Kadri and JVR, you said, I agree with you there. You got, there are guys you have to build around, and JVR obviously is hurt, which doesn't help his value at all. And Bozak is signed. If they could move Bozak's contract, I'm sure they would try to. But at the same point, if they're gearing up for a run at Stamkos, they still need to have some depth up and down the lineup. But why not move everybody? If you're
I think Nazem Kadri could move, actually, and here's why.
He's 25 years old.
You look at the future of this. A, I think they could get a lot for him. B, let's just say Stamkos is there, or they have it on good authority they're going to sign him. If you keep Bozak, and then all the other guys coming up, a few of which play center, how many centers do you really need?
Yeah,
where I look at it and say that if you're going to bring up these young guys and eventually need to get them all top 6 minutes, at some point you kind of have to, you're going to have a logjam if you don't get rid of all of these guys.
Kadri's so skilled, though. I mean,
I think they could get a real. I look at it and say that, they could. I would go for a prospect. I would go for a guy that's a year or two away that could just supplement what you have coming in. Maybe a defensive prospect or something. But I think you get a huge thing for him. I don't know if it'll happen. It could even happen possibly during the draft. I could see him going, though, just because, as good as he is, nothing against him, I just feel like they're going to have a lot of guys like him, especially if they make the moves that we think they're going to make.
The people it's weird, though, too, because the people in Toronto, everybody's such a lightning rod, of course. And, Bozak, obviously, the contract is such a big deal. And Kadri has been, they've railroaded him at times with his fitness, with his, his inconsistencies. I like Kadri a lot. I mean, you just watch some of the plays. He made a play an end-to-end rush last week that resulted in a goal that was just like stunning. Like this is his potential, and he's only 25. I mean, for as many years as it feels like we've been talking about Nazem Kadri, he's only 25 years old. I mean, it's not like, and this is a prospect. This isn't like Tyler Bozak, who was undrafted. Giving him all that money, who had, a year or two. But, I think the market's really cooled here a lot, especially with Bufflin re-signing. Yandel's not going to get traded because the Rangers need to hang on to him with the McDonough uncertainty and left shot defenseman. It just feels like, Yandel's becoming one of their better defensemen, and they're finally realizing it, which the Wolves are going to start coming out, it feels like, but we'll get to that, maybe next year when the Rangers, when things start happening with them. But, I mean, Andrew Ladd is the guy, apparently, and I like Andrew Ladd as a player. He's a good leader. He's been the captain in Winnipeg, since they moved there. I guess I think he slots perfectly with Taves and Hossa in Chicago. I know nobody wants to hear that because then they become a dangerous 3-line team, and that's about the last thing anybody in the Western Conference needs is Chicago as a dangerous 3-line team once Hossa comes back. But is it you hear Eric Staal, Dave? We've been talking about him for months. It feels like, and where does he slot? I mean, Islanders is what I'm hearing.
I don't think he moves. I don't. They're really close. They're right there. They're 2 points out of a spot, with games at hand or whatever. They're right there.
Yeah.
Here's my question to you though, Pat. Give me a team that's firmly within the playoffs. I don't want to say a lock because anything can happen, but a team that is going to make the playoffs that has to improve. And give me a team that's on the outside now, looking in that could really benefit from making a sort of move that can maybe put them over the hump.
Good question. Well, Pittsburgh's made a lot of moves already, so it seems like they're. I mean, God only knows how they come up with all this cap space to actually make these moves. Chicago again. It feels like they need to shore up that number one left wing because Andrew Shaw. For as nice a player as he, and I heard Joel Quenneville say it in a scrum last week. He said he's okay with his defense. He wants to get They want another forward, which is, unique to hear because, think about how big a liability their defense was last year in the postseason, and yet they still won somehow. I would say Chicago, really, Andrew Ladd seems perfect for them. I look at some of these guys, some of these teams, and I don't know where some of the, like I heard Stahl with the Islanders, and I don't know where he slots because they're pretty good down the middle. They're finally getting some continuity in their lines and whatnot. They've won 6 of 10, and it's just, that team's basically set, I would think. But if there's a team on the outs, I agree with you that Carolina would be wise to hang on to Stahl and make a run towards that 8 spot because they're heating up here and they're right there. It's an interesting question because, injuries come into play and Ottawa's heating up all of a sudden here. They're starting to get back in the hunt a little bit. They're only 4 out. I know they have a couple of played more games, but, they made their big move with Phaneuf and now they're starting to pay off here. And, it just feels like, the Devils need an offensive weapon. And maybe they'll get it back in Camilleri, or maybe this Kalinin will crop up here. The team that's outside the hunt right now that needs to get it. Because, you look at what they've done. They've scored the fewest goals in the whole league now all of a sudden, Dave. Yeah. And, Corey Schneider is basically keeping them in the hunt here. And if there is a team that is really desperate for an offensive move for a top 9, to get their top 9, and because think about it, Dave, their goals are coming from like 4 guys the whole season, and yet they still happen to be in it here with that win over the Rangers on Tuesday. The Devils would, and Shiro talks about he doesn't want to mortgage the future, but there's some picks that if you could go out and get like I said, jokingly said a Parento type, or a Boys type. I know they're a little loaded on the right side there, but I just feels like that's a team that needs to if they're really serious about a push to the playoffs, that's a team that needs a deal. You mentioned Carolina. You almost have to reward your young players and your whatever fan base is left down there by kind of sticking to it and maybe even trying to add here. I saw yesterday that Vancouver is going to start making some of its players available. It feels like Chris Higgins could be a nice fit for a team, a depth player who has some experience in postseason, could be a nice fit. Maybe even, he's a Long Island kid, maybe even in the metropolitan area in New York somewhere.
Yeah, that could be. For me, though, I look at it and I think if there's 2 teams that pop out to me right now. I think Tampa Bay needs to upgrade their defense. This is not – look, Tampa Bay, I know they've struggled to score, but they've been better lately-ish. Bishop's been pretty good. I look at this defense and I say, especially Garrison's been out for a while. I don't look at this team as having a Stanley Cup-ready defense. I think that –
They have the number 1 guy, though.
They do, but I think they need depth. I really think, even 2 guys. I look at that team and say if they can pull a solid defenseman from someone for Drouin, do it.
Yeah.
Even, I know we've heard the Rangers looking at Drouin. Even if somehow they're dumb enough to give up Yandel, who I know Yandel isn't great defensively, but I think that he does have an upside that would work well in Tampa. I would make that move. But I think for Tampa, if you're going to get rid of Drouin, you might as well do it now to fill the hole that you have on your team, which is defense.
How about Anaheim with one of those defensemen out there? It seems like a natural fit, one of their young guys, one of their young defense. From a Tampa perspective, I'm not saying from an Anaheim perspective because Anaheim seems to have found it a little bit. But
I just don't know if Drouin would necessarily fit in there, though.
Yeah,
not to say it has to be for Drouin, though. They could certainly make a deal that doesn't involve him.
Honestly,
I don't
Dave,
know.
The rumor floated. I think it was in the New York Post, and I don't know why the Rangers wouldn't want to try to go get Valerie Nichushkin from Dallas. if they can. Depending on Nash's injury, he's only 20 years old. It would almost reverse what they gave up in the Yandle trade last year. Now, it would make their defense thinner this season, but they have Brady Shea waiting right there. The guy played the most minutes out of everyone in the game Tuesday night, for the Rangers at least. He played more than 22 minutes in his third NHL game. If Valerie Nichushkin's on the table there, go get him, man, for the Rangers. Especially with, the uncertainty surrounding Nash's injury and, the Rangers looking to get younger. It makes sense from Dallas' perspective too, because they could increase their offensive potential. I mean, and some of their defense. Obviously, Dallas doesn't necessarily need to improve the offense. It's just more that two-way kind of game that way. But I'm sorry. And then your team outside that you think needs to make a deal.
I think it's Carolina. I know this is surprising, but they've really hung around now. And I mean, they've been every time you think they're going to fall off.
I know the goaltending.
They've been pretty good. Yeah, I mean they're 5-3-2. What about James Reimer to the Carolina Hurricanes? I think that's a deal, because it seems like everyone's in on Reimer, and you got to figure that Carolina could give up some pieces. They have some nice young talent. I think that Carolina is going to stay put. Unless they get blown away with a deal. I think they're going to stay put. And I think if you add a good Reimer onto that team, they could be a playoff team. I mean, I'm not.
If Reimer plays well enough is the thing. Reimer's had a good year for sure. And the intriguing thing is just, their goaltending's been Eddie Lack, and they thought Eddie Lack was going to challenge Ward, and he's been as bad as Ward has. The question is, Reimer has bounced with inconsistency, of course, as most goalies do.
But is that also a product of being in the pressure cooker?
It could be. I mean, I like James Reimer. I think he's a real even keel kind of, down to earth guy that could really benefit. I mean, it seems like he benefits from that personality up there. It seems like a couple things happened with him in Toronto. Obviously, losing that playoff series, you can't pin it all on him, but losing that playoff series to Boston kind of hurt, and then the Jonathan Bernier trade made it worse. There could be a fresh start there for him in Carolina, especially like you said, Dave. If in relative anonymity, it could help him a little bit. I would expect Ron Francis to try, right?
I just think also it's a move for the future too. That if you think that he could be a goaltender, and you realize you don't have one right now, and your team is building, he could be there for the next few years.
Sure, if you sign him. I mean, he's a pending unrestricted. But,
I mean, obviously they'll have the money.
And that's that's true. It's a good point. I mean, I'm with you on that. Like I said before, I think they need to kind of show their market that they're in it. Mm-hmm. Since they're in it, because there is as much, if your team is as, they haven't made the playoffs since 2009, and they're a tough team to play against. They've been a tough team to play against all year. And Dave, their real problem has been goaltending all year. So if Reimer is in it and playing well, I mean, that's a dangerous team. I mean, you look at how they played now that Cam Ward's playing pretty well a little bit, and obviously, I mean, you can't put it all on Cam Ward because he's as inconsistent as they come, but yeah, I mean, I sign me up for, if I'm from a neutral perspective, sign me up for that deal with the Hurricanes.
Yeah, absolutely. I do like that one, Pat. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on here. We will be back next week with probably a few trades.
Let's not forget, by the way, besides Monday. We have Torts' return to the Garden on Monday night. So, and
are you going to be there for that one?
I'm not. I might be around the Garden during the day, but not at night. But it's going to be Dave. I really want to close on this because this cracked me up. Dave, did you see what Torts said this week?
Oh yeah. Oh my God, those comments were ridiculous.
If you're not familiar with it, and this is why having John Tortorella in the league is, I mean, you could not stand him, you could tolerate him, but having him in the league is more entertaining than not. He had the coaches challenge the other night, and he didn't win the coaches challenge. And his post-game quote was, "The coaches challenge is like a box of chocolates because you never know what you're going to get." So it's hilarious. It's fantastic. And, he rubs people the wrong way, and he tries to intimidate people, but having him around the game just makes the game more fun. And he's going to coach the U.S. team in the World Cup next year. So let's, brace yourself for that, people.
It's going to be fun. Yeah, the next few days are absolutely going to be fascinating. Can't wait. We'll have probably a lot to talk about next week, that's for sure.
I hope so.
Yeah, and maybe John Tortorella will have some more comments. You never know.
I don't doubt he will.
Yeah, from now on, it's just a sprint to the finish. It's going to be fascinating. But for Pat Pickens, I'm Dave Turner. This is Puck Talk with Pickens and Turner. We will be back next week after the trade deadline. Plenty to talk about. We'll catch you then.